So we've previously looked at how you can use the input command to input text and store it in a variable, and Python automatically decides that it's going to be a string variable. So if we have something like this, what is your name, we can ask that, and then we can print hello and then comma name. But one of the things that people often do is they don't include capital letters and other things like that. So one of the first things you might want to do, a simple and also useful technique, is to change the case of some text that's been entered. And you can do this in a variety of places. So for example, if I wanted to change the name here so that it had a capital letter at the start, there's a method called title. So if we have something like this, so you can do this to a variable or you can do it with some text. So if I say hello, for example, dot title, so it comes after the actual string. So hello dot title capitalizes the first letter of every word. So if I did this, for example, hello world dot title, it'll do the H and the W, and that will work the same as with, oh no, see, being old, I automatically put the capital letters on there as well, but you can do the same thing with a variable, so like so. So that's quite useful, and you can do that in one of two places. So I could either do that as I input it, so up here, so I could input it and convert it before I store it, or I could put it on here as I display it. So if I'm only inputting it once and displaying it once, then it doesn't really matter either way. However, if I'm inputting the name and then using it throughout my program, and I always want it to have the capital letter, it probably makes more sense to do it at the top there. So I only need to do it once. So if I run my program now and do that, it'll put a capital letter on it, and it'll also do this. So even if I get it completely wrong, it'll sort it out for me. Similarly, there are methods for converting to uppercase and to lowercase. Oh, there we go. So they can be quite useful for things like validation. So if you wanted to do like this, so we could say option equals input. So this would probably be in the middle of your program, wouldn't it? Press Y to continue. Okay. So if we just did it like that without knowing about being able to change case, what would happen if I said something now like if option equals, so we said we wanted them to press capital Y, didn't we? So if that print continue else, struggling with my fingers this morning, print don't continue. There we go. So very simple program. Press Y to continue. So I press Y and it's selected don't continue, and the reason is because when you do a comparison like that, it's case sensitive, so it only looks for exactly what I'm looking for there. So it's only looking for a capital Y. So you could say if option is Y or option is lowercase y, so that would do the trick. So now put a lowercase y in and it says continue. But you could, I suppose you might get some person who says, oh yes, I want to continue. So you might get an edit with something like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is we'll try converting it to uppercase. And if I convert it to uppercase, then I only need to check for the capital case, because we know it's going to be a capital. It's never going to be a lowercase y now because I've converted it. So I'm going to say y, and even though I've put a lowercase y in, we're continuing. What about that other example? So what about if they type yes or yeah or something else beginning with y, and we want to be able to accommodate that? Well, there are other techniques that you can use to pick out just specific parts of strings. So the first thing is it's a bit like an array or a list. So if we have a string and then in square brackets we put a number, what that tells us is which character is at that position. So as with lists and other things, Python starts counting at 0. So the first character in the string is character 0, the second is character 1, etc. So the character 0 from hello is the H. So one of the things I could say is the first character from my option string a Y. So now, if I run that, I say yes, it copes with that. Obviously, you might not want to do that, but that's an example of something you could do. So we can do that with a string. So if I say name equals Andrew, for example, we can do the same thing. We can say name 0, and that'll pick out the first letter. And if I do name 1, that'll pick out the second letter. So if we want to pick out the last letter, well, we could. There's a function called len, which tells us how many letters or characters are in the string. So that's telling me there's 6 in there. So that means the last one's going to be 5, doesn't it? Because they're numbered from 0 to 5 rather than 1 to 6. So I could do name, and then I could do len name -1, which would give me the last letter regardless of how long name is. But that's getting a bit fiddly. But that's how you'd have to do it in lots of other programming languages. So BASIC, using mid, for example. You could use write actually in BASIC, but JavaScript, for example, you might need to do something like that. However, Python has quite a neat trick. You can have a negative index. So when the index is negative, it counts in from the right. So if you have name -1, it will give you the last character. Now, when you're counting in from the right-hand side, it does start at 1, which is slightly confusing, but if you think about it, -0 and +0 are the same, so you wouldn't be able to distinguish in that case. So name -2 is the second letter in from the end, which is the E. So just as with range, you can actually have 1, 2, or 3 numbers inside the brackets, and they're separated by colons. So for example, if I wanted to have just the first 3 letters from my name, I could do from character 0 to character 3. Now notice that character 3 is actually the 4th character, but it doesn't include the last one. So it's a bit like, again, when you use range, it takes a bit of getting used to. You actually need to kind of count 1 further than you actually want. So I've got characters 0, 1 and 2 there, so it hasn't actually given me the 3rd one. What you can do is you can do a similar thing as well. So you could do I want from, so if I want just the middle of the word, for example, I can count from character 1, and you can use negative ones as well. So I'm going to go -1. And that will give me the string apart from the first character and the last character. So you can mix and match your negative and your positive. What you can also do is you can miss out one of those numbers. So if you miss out one of those numbers, it assumes that you're going to be starting at the start or ending at the end, depending on which one you missed out. So if I say name 1: that means start at 1 and carry on to the end. If I do colon -1, that means start at the start and go as far as the last but 1 character. So you can get the strange situation where you do that, where you have a colon. No, that's not a colon, that's a colon. And that just gives you the whole thing. So that's not particularly useful, except there is a third, it's not quite a parameter, but there's a third option that you can add when you're, this is called string slicing, when you're slicing a string, is that you can specify a step size. So if you only want every other character, you could say, you could say start at the second character and go to the last but 1 character and go up in steps of 2, so every other character, which will just give the N and the R, or obviously that's probably more useful if you wanted to do the whole thing, in which case you could do this. So that means do the whole string, but only every other letter. But this is particularly interesting. So if you want to reverse a string, you can use a negative number as well. So if you start at the start, end at the end, and go in steps of -1, it actually reverses the word, which is quite a neat trick, being able to do that in a single command. So that's string slicing. We've also previously looked at using the plus. So you can do things like this, hello plus world. And what that does is it just concatenates the two strings together. What you can also do is, we've looked at casting when we're looking at the videos, so we can turn a number into a string. So you can do that kind of thing, and that will turn it into text, and that's useful for combining it with words, for example. But you can also turn text into other things. So if I say list, for example, hello, then what it does is it takes the string and it puts each letter in the string into a list, and that can be quite useful if you want to process it in a particular way. You can also do a similar thing with words. So if you had a sentence, so my name is Andrew, for example, there's a command called split, or a method, I suppose I should call it. So, and what that does is it splits the words into a string, so into a list, at the spaces. So that can be quite useful for breaking a sentence up into individual words, for example. Split can also take an argument as well. So if I was reading information in from a comma-separated variable file, for example, and I had numbers like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's not a list or a tuple, that's a string with comma-separated words in it. I can do this, a comma-separated characters, sorry. I can say split that at the comma. So I can put something inside the brackets, which is the thing that I want to split it at, and that will split my string at the comma into a list of values. So that's particularly useful. So we've already looked at len, and we've looked at splitting. What else can we do? Well, we can check whether a particular character is in a string. So if we can say is A in A, B, C, for example, and that would return true or false to tell us whether it is. And if we say is A in hello, no, it's not. So that might be helpful. That can be quite useful for checking that a particular input is within a list of valid characters, for example. So if you're validating things like URLs, there's only a certain list of characters that's acceptable. You can't have spaces, for example. So you could have one string with the acceptable characters in it, and check that each symbol is in that. And then probably the next useful thing is find. So you can find the position of a particular letter within another word or string. So for example, if we did, so I've still got my name there. If I did name dot find, so is there an A in my name? Yes, there is, and it tells us what position it's at. It's at position 0. So if it returns an integer, that's the position, and then we can use that in there. If it's not in there, so name dot find Z, for example, then you get a negative number. So you don't get an error, but you'll get a negative number if it's not in there. We get a -1. Otherwise, it'll tell you where it is, and that can be quite useful. So if you have something like this, so if you have a full name, then what you can do is you can find where the space is, and you can split it up. So you could say, I'm going to say name. I'm going to find where the space is. In fact, I'm going to start at the start and go as far as where the space is. So I'm going to say name.find space, and then close the square bracket. So what that'll do is that'll, using my string slicing method that we looked at a minute ago, it will start at the start of the string and go as far as, but not including, the position of the space. And then similarly, we can do a similar thing to find out the rest of my name. So I want to start at name.find space +1, so 1 space after that, and carry on until the end. So assuming people have only got 2-part names, we can split full names up into forenames and surnames by using find and slicing up the text as so. So that's an introduction to some of the more useful things that you can do with text as part of your program that can be quite useful for formatting the output and for validation and things like that.